Hello,
Hi,
how are you?
I'm great. I'm Kristen,
I'm Kevin, and this is the Marriage in the Buff podcast.
and it is good to be back. I feel like we were gone for a while because we had guests last time.
Absolutely. We had Nathan and Alicia sharing their story about overcoming health issues.
Yep,
And next week, we should have our friends Mike and Megan, who will be on with us too,
to
talking
tell a
about,
different story.
yes, talking about how things they've overcome in their marriage.
Yes, it's exciting.
Absolutely.
Um, but what are we talking about tonight?
I don't know. You tell me.
You don't know? I thought we just talked about that.
Oh, we did. We did. So tonight, we're going to talk about priorities.
Yes, priorities are important in marriage and in
Absolutely.
life
Yes.
because even if you're not married, you should have priorities too.
Yes. And so many times we get our priorities mixed up or we're always juggling the priorities. I think that's a bigger thing. Like whatever the pressing thing is at the moment becomes our priority.
Yeah, and I think we should also probably talk about when we are talking about priorities that sometimes we're in seasons where our priorities might change for a little while, but not to the point where it derails us for life. And I think that that's sometimes a danger for people.
Absolutely. And those seasons vary. Like when you first get married and then you start having children, if you're having children, then obviously infants and babies are a priority because they
Right.
rely on you. So that kind of takes moms and wives away for a little bit,
Yeah.
or husbands, depending on the situation and depending on the day. You
Well,
know,
that's what I was going to say. Sure, because even if a mom is the primary caregiver, if she becomes sick and the dad has to take care of both people and the mom needs medicine, but the baby's screaming, it doesn't mean that your wife is not your priority.
right. But you've got a little one who cannot do anything for
Yes,
themselves. So you have to take that into account.
right. So I think that when we talk about priorities, it sometimes hurts people's feelings because they feel that kids are sometimes more important than their spouse. Like, I think that that's a popular one. But it doesn't mean that we don't use common sense in all situations to see who needs help more.
Absolutely. And I think that's it. We have to use common sense and, and it may not be even, it's not, it doesn't have to be like a day by day, an hour by hour. Sometimes it's minute by minute that, okay, well, I really have this pressing phone call I have to take from work.
Right.
And like my wife or my husband's just going to have to wait a couple minutes. It doesn't mean that this is a higher priority than them, but it does mean like right this second, I need to take care of this. And that becomes a priority of the moment. And that's different from juggling those priorities because I think a lot
Yeah.
of people go through life and it's like, okay, what's my priority? Well, today I'm really working hard to get the place I want at work, but then, oh, wait a minute, my kids have this going on. Oh, my wife needs this attention. And there's this thing at church, or oh, I'm going to go to a football game, or I'm going to do this. And we just kind of throw everything up in the air and kind of,
See where it
unfortunately, we're just
lands.
bouncing it, keep bouncing it and bouncing it and bouncing it. And we don't really define those priorities.
Yeah, that is like super good point because I think that is how people get overwhelmed and say yes to a lot of good things. And when they're deciding what should be important in life, not in the second, but in the grand scheme of life, they miss it because they don't have their priorities in mind.
Yeah, you just keep chasing whatever the need of the moment is.
Right.
And when you keep adding that stuff, it's just like, well, if I have 50 things that need my priority, then nothing really can be my priority because I'm just juggling those things back and forth. So a lot of times,
Yeah.
that's really good that you said that. We take on too many things. We only have a capacity to handle so many things.
Right.
And if we just keep adding and adding to them, we're actually taking away from our real priorities.
And as at some point, I'm sure in the future, we're going to want to talk about spiritual disciplines and how that looks in our life and having solitude and having Sabbath. And all of these things depend on you keeping your priorities in line Otherwise, it will never happen. If you're always chasing the next important thing, you're never going to be able to give yourself space for anything that actually is important.
Absolutely. Those things keep robbing the things that should be ahead of them. And, for a Christian, it's pretty simple. And I think this carries through to anybody for the most part. I mean, you have your priorities of God is
Oh,
number one.
I was going to ask you I was going to ask you this question. I was going to say, what are your priorities?
So God, your spouse, and your children, and then kind of everything else falls in line. It can be
Yeah,
work, it can be your church family, it can be your family, it can be whatever it is. But those things kind of fall
right.
in order after that. But you've got to keep those first two, those first three, really up there,
Yes.
and it needs to stay in that priority too. It's not like, oh well, today Kristen's more important than God, or the girls are more important than Kristen and God, or whatever, or work's more important. I mean, as a general rule, like I said, it can be a minute by minute, and things take priority at a moment, or like you said, in a season, like with kids and stuff like that. Or if there's sickness, maybe it's a sick parent,
Sure.
or whatever it may be. Or maybe there is a situation at your work that you really have to lend a lot of time to right this very second. But that's a season. That's
Yes.
not the rule. That's the season you're in.
And if we communicate well with those who are a higher priority than those things that are happening. So if I come to you and the girls and say, I need to travel for 3 days for work or something like that, so I can't make you dinner or drive you here
You're
or
going to make me
be at
dinner?
this. It's an example.
No.
So communicating to those in higher importance of that season or of that need, I think shows a priority to those.
Absolutely. And I think that is important, that we need to communicate what's going on, like you said, to those in those higher priorities and stuff. Because the thing is, if we go through life and we just let everything be a priority, or if we, a good example is like kids, when we get things out of priority. It's one thing when they're a baby and they can't take care of
Right.
themselves. It's another thing when they're 10 and they're taking priority over your spouse,
Yes.
or 5 or 15 or whatever it may be. Because when we do that and we let those things take priority, or maybe it's your work or whatever it is, when we let those things take priority over our spouse, then we're in for trouble, because we're going to be growing apart. Same thing if we let those things take priority over God. If it's like, oh God, I'll get you eventually, or what, I don't need you right now. The moment you don't need him, you're going to find out you really, really do. And that's a scary situation to be in.
Right.
He doesn't want to be, down on the list. He is your priority.
Yeah. So, I mean, we can talk more about the priority of things in life and how you had a good point. You said the top three are really important for just about everyone to stay in that order. To keep God first, He wants all, He wants full surrender. So, He should be number one. And you've said many times, if you don't have that relationship with God right, that second in priority, your spouse, you're going to have a rough time with that relationship. And likewise, a lot of time when you have a problem with that relationship, you're not modeling it well to your third in line, which are your kids. But then after that, I think it's not always the same for every person, and that's sometimes okay.
Mm-hmm.
For example, someone might value in their life working out and health and fitness higher than another person has a need for volunteering somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Like they may be volunteering at a certain place and have a higher need. So I think that that's very important. But then the second question I want to ask you, after what your priorities are, is your actions, is your day-to-day actions in line with those priorities?
Yeah, that's the hard part. And I think we miss that. We may say, "Oh yeah, these are my priorities," but like you said, does your day reflect it?
Yeah.
I read Warrior Poet by John Lovell last year, and it really goes into that. And he says, okay, what are your priorities? Now write those down. Now go through your day, go through your week, and just write down what you do. Like, just Journal your days and
Like
stuff
map
like that.
out your time.
And then go back a week later and take a look. Now, do your priorities equal your time? And if not, you're only fooling yourself. And I think that's a lot of things. Like people in general, oh, what's your priorities? Oh God, my wife, my kids. Yeah.
Right, like
Well,
it's
but
easy
you're
to say, but are you living it out?
right, but you're at
Right?
work 60 hours a week, and then you're, watching TV, watching a movie, you're out with the guys, the girls, different things like that. And those things don't match up with what you're saying.
And that's where it gets tricky, I think. You brought work into that. That's a good point because, I mean, a lot of times we need to work to survive,
Hmm.
and we are spending a lot of time at work. However, it's priorities are not just time spent, but time well spent.
Hmm.
So, you know that the evening is a shut off for work and it is our time together. Or a Sunday is shut off from all things and it's time together. So it's also showing the importance of a life well lived inside those priorities.
Yeah, and just because if we're using the example of work, just because you're at work doesn't mean you can't be loving God and loving your spouse and giving them that priority too. With God, it's simple that people should see God and you should
A
see
hundred
Him
percent.
reflected in the things you do, the conversations you have. And are the greatest commandments to love God. The second is to love people. So if we're loving people while we're at work and stuff, we're honoring God and honoring that time and that relationship. Now, on the other side of that, our spouses, though we can't physically be present with them, we can be praying for them. We can be texting them, send them an email, whatever it
Yes.
may be,
Keeping
call them, keeping
connection.
that connection and making sure they know that, you know what, I might not be physically with you, but you're still a priority. You're on my mind. And I think that's a bigger part. Just knowing that, okay, well, I have to be here for 8 hours a day or whatever it may
Yeah.
be, but you're still on my mind and I'm still thinking of you and stuff like that. Same thing with the kids. Like a lot of people miss that connection that, you know what, your kids are at school. When they get out of school, it's simple to send them a text or whatever, check in, see what they're doing, and let them know that, hey, I am at work, I'm away, but I'm still thinking about you and I care and I'm concerned for you and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I like that you said that God's number one is to love God, and number two, to love your neighbor. So, on top of that, I'm going to add a third is when Jesus left us, he said our mission is to make disciples, right? So we already
Absolutely.
know what we're supposed to do in life.
Hmm.
What am I supposed to do? Well, we were told. We were told to love God with all that we have, love each other, and share God with others. So I
Yes.
feel like those three things sum it up. So if you are doing that well, you can do that well at work. You can do that well when you are traveling, when you
Hmm.
are in recreational, when you are at a football game for your kids, when you are like, it is not just single focused. And when you're driving to work, you can use that time to pray or connect. Like, I think it's using all of those opportunities to make other people feel valued.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. A lot of times when we say, oh, God's our priority and stuff, we think it means going to church, going to a building, when
Hmm.
that is the furthest from the truth.
Right.
When Jesus said that, there was no church. The people were the church, and that was it. It was about the relationships around you, and church is about the community and things like that. In that community, while it is our church community and it's the people we
Mhm.
choose to do life with and pour into, it's also the people that are around us that we are to be drawing into that community. And that's by the way we act, by the
Yeah.
things we do, by how well we love others.
Yes.
And that can be so another employee where we work. It can be someone who works for us. It can be someone we work for, whatever it is. We're supposed to be doing all things well and loving on people. So it's not about a building you go to. It's not about a Sunday morning. It's not about anything like that. It's about everywhere you go. You are the church. You are the temple of God, and you are a reflection of Him.
Yeah. When you were saying that, and you said about just going to church on Sunday, I sometimes think that people might think it's, shutting off, like, I'm going to get some
Yeah.
Jesus or I need to, get with, but it is showing him as a priority in your life in everything you do. So it carries through. There's no like on off switch.
Hmm.
it's a continual. And that makes sense, right? Because if he's your number one priority, he should
Yep. Shine
im-
through to everything.
yeah, to everything, right?
Yep.
To your work, to your volunteering, to your hobbies, to what you put into your minds that you're reading and watching.
Yeah.
So to the songs you're listening to, doesn't mean you always have to listen to praise music, but should you listen to some really dishonoring
Let's see what was this. Let's see. Let's explore this.
bad music
Bad music. All right, bad music
with
is where we went.
bad words?
Bad words and bad music.
I'm just
Bad.
saying things that are dishonoring.
Yeah.
So, him being your first priority, does it permeate your entire life, all your relationships? Is that where your mind goes first? I think that's important because, like we said, priority doesn't necessarily mean hours on a watch.
Yeah. And I think that's it. I think that's really good what you said, that our priorities, they also trickle down. So if my priorities are God, that should trickle down to you,
Yes.
and that should trickle down to the girls. That
Yes.
should trickle down to friends,
Yes.
church, family, work.
How you choose your
all
friends.
those, yes, all those things. Then
The job you choose.
yeah, and then it goes down to you. So same thing. So yeah, I'm to love you and I'm to honor you and I'm supposed to have you as my priority, but that's also something that needs to be known. So like with
Yes.
your kids, they need to know that, hey, mom is a bigger priority than me or work or whatever it is. And I don't mean that in a bad way. But they need to know that. And the same thing when you're at work, when you're in those places, when you're at church, wherever it may be, like your marriage needs to be known. Like there should not be a chance where people are like, oh, well, I wonder if they're married or something like that. And honestly, like in the world we live in today, where everyone, I remember a conversation we had not long ago, and it was with someone who works at a hospital, and they were talking about in the break room and stuff like that, that all it is the people they unload on their spouses about
Oh,
how
yeah.
bad they are, and
Complaining.
complaining, oh,
Yeah.
mine's this and mine's that, and I can't believe this and I can't believe that. And that is so dangerous in so many ways.
Yeah.
And that does not honor or prioritize your spouse. And, we need to be the light in those situations because number one, we need the light of Jesus in us. But number two, we need to say, listen, that's not the only way. You can be happy. You can have a loving relationship with your spouse. And it does take work and everything, but don't dishonor your spouse by like just falling into the complaining and
Right.
in the status quo of what the world is today.
That's really funny because as you're saying this, you're actually bringing up a different topic that we could have a whole nother podcast on, how to honor my spouse,
Mm-hmm.
right? That is what you're boiling it down to, not complaining about them, choosing right friends, like being known, right? Having your relationship known. So all of those are all sub things, but it all boils up to priority.
Yeah.
So this topic we're talking about now, the priorities of marriage, they really flow into everything. If you're
Yeah.
keeping your priorities right, other things do fall in line.
Absolutely.
For example, like I remember this was like a year or so ago, and someone at work needed a ride for their car, I think, but it was of the opposite sex.
Mm-hmm.
And I, before even saying, hey, I can just drop you off I'm passing by and going, I called you and I said, would you be upset?
Mm-hmm.
Because I wanted to honor you because you were more priority than
Mm-hmm.
an acquaintance. It ended up not, but you were like, yeah, that's fine. But my point is making all of those choices with your priorities in mind. And I think if you make your day-to-day choices based on your priorities, it will make all of those other things, honoring your spouse and all of the other topics we might talk about, privacy, finance, like so many other things will fall in line because you keep your priorities together.
Yeah, let me go back to that one though. What you just said was a good point too. And of that, you called me to ask me that. I mean, I remember the conversation. I remember that day and stuff like that. But you didn't call me to ask me because you had to.
No.
You called me to ask me because you wanted to, and that you did honor my opinion and my thoughts and stuff like that.
Well, I cared about your feelings.
Yes. And that shows priority to me and stuff like that, and vice versa if it was a similar situation. And I think so many times we miss that in society today. We're like, oh, okay, do you want to go here, or do you want, or someone will ask you, do you want to go here, or do you want to do this or stuff? And when you say, oh, well, let me check with my wife or my husband, it's like,
Right.
oh, why do you have to do that? It's like, wait a minute, wait, I didn't say I had to do that.
Right.
I want to do
And
that.
it's not like that would always happen at every, like, I'm
No.
not going to walk somewhere alone or whatever and call you and say, is this okay if I talk to the,
Right.
like,
No. But
it's just,
it is those things that set us apart. So we're showing God in that is as our priority, because we are set apart. We're different than the
yes.
world. And then it honors our spouse, and it puts them in a priority to say, okay, I have free will to do anything I want to do, but let me just let them know what's going on and make sure that goes. And it's a way of prioritizing those things, because on the other end of that, you hear people like, oh, where's my husband? He never came home, or my wife never came
Yeah.
home, or they come home 3 hours later and they were shopping, or they went out with friends, or whatever it may be, whatever they were doing, or maybe they took the kids somewhere, but they didn't take the time to tell their spouse, because that's it. It's not like you're really asking permission. It's more like saying, hey, in a polite way, this is what I'm going to do.
Sure. But you
Now,
can ask permission, right?
mhm,
Like you can say, will this upset you?
right, but I'm saying
But I don't
it's
mean as a have to
right.
because, but like when you are tied to another person, it is a union.
Yeah.
And it is not like you're my roommate and I'm coming and going as
Hmm.
I please without care. And we're not, and if you didn't care about where I was going or where I was headed, that might hurt as well.
Yeah,
Like the opposite.
absolutely. But I think that's a line that we walk. But as being set apart and like wanting to honor or prioritize God, our spouse, those are things we need to do.
Yeah.
And I'll say it the other way, like having four daughters
Uh-huh.
who are teens and early 20s.
Uh-huh.
It really is something to try to get them to prioritize our time, our feelings, and stuff like that,
Yeah.
because they just go do what they want. And I don't mean that in a bad
Well, they
way,
have a
but they
newfound
have their own,
freedom,
yes,
right?
so they have their schedule and what they're doing and stuff like that,
But I do need to
and
say
they
one
don't
thing.
tell us what's going on. So a lot of times we're sitting here like,
Yeah.
oh, who's going to be here for dinner? What's going on? Is
Right.
anything going on? You know what I mean? So I think as a parent on the other side of that, eh, that feeling sucks sometimes. So as a spouse, if that's something you're going through and stuff like that, I can imagine it's like after a while you're just like, well, whatever, and that's just driving between you. It's like she doesn't even honor my time. She doesn't even care, about what I have planned or what I'm doing or my
Exactly.
thoughts or anything, and that's just driving a wedge between you. And it may be a little bit at a time, but that autonomous freedom is not good for your relationship.
No, absolutely. And it just brings me back to the point of how do you want to live? Do you want to live more as a roommate?
Hmm.
Because some people do draw away and don't even realize that that's happening. But like you said, maybe not even so a wedge, but it's a space,
Yeah.
right? That freedom is a space too, because while freedom is a good word,
Hmm.
we too much freedom is not what we want. Like
Absolutely.
we want intimacy, we want time together, we
Yeah.
want to know each other and be known, and same with God, right?
Yes,
Because
that's
we
what I was
don't
just
want
thinking.
a freedom from God. We want him as close as we can get.
Yeah, and I think that's really really important. I was thinking about that as you were saying it and stuff. If I have these feelings about my kids, or if I have these feelings about my wife or something like that, and that's something I think we can all say, oh, we've had those.
Yeah.
At least we've had them. We might not currently have, but we've had those feelings. God has those same feelings about us.
Right.
I mean, he says he is a jealous God, and he wants
Yes.
our time. He wants our attention. He wants our everything. And if we're just running around to whatever the priority is, not giving it to him, we're not even on giving it to our spouse or whatever, we're just like juggling those things in the air. How's he feel?
Right. And with that, if I'm going to stop and consider your feelings and ask you how it makes you feel, why am I not stopping and considering God's feelings
Yes.
and taking decisions to Him first
Yep.
before you do the action,
Yep.
before you have to repent and say, I'm sorry. So, I feel like priority is just so important. It definitely should be the number one thing to talk about. And when you talk about new couples or looking at relationships, when you start to talk about priority in relationship with God as number one, with your spouse as number two, your family, and other really good things under that, um, you think about the Bible and why people feel like you have to be, why would I have to be equally yoked? Why do I have to marry someone who believes the same things? Can you imagine trying to live this out, a priority of God first, spouse second, if you are married to someone who doesn't feel the same way?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how does that work?
Doesn't. And that's kind of where we got to where we are today with, you know, it's not even divorce anymore because I mean there are a lot of divorces, but the divorce rates are not as high as they were like in the early 80s and stuff like that for a simple fact. People aren't getting married.
Yeah,
So they
right.
won't even make that commitment to get married because they're like, oh, this is not going to work. They don't even have the faith to think, oh, this is going to work. I want to be with him for the rest of my life and stuff like that. And I think that's it. It's like, wow, deep down, we know we're different. I mean, we're all different.
Uh-huh.
And we know that and we realize that and we recognize it. And it's like, well, you know what? This might be good for now, but it's not good in the long run. There's no way this is going to work. And I will tell you, after 25 years of doing anything and everything, both of us and stuff, without God, it does not work.
Yeah,
There,
yeah.
you would be hard pressed to find people in America that have been married for 25, 35, 40, 50 years that did not have God in there. I mean, I can't even imagine the numbers, statistically, what it would be with a Christian couple as opposed to just a couple who does whatever they want and everything else. And you know what I mean? That really has no God, has nothing in there that's centering them and drawing them to Him.
Yeah. And
So,
while I see now that it's very important to be equally yoked and to have God number one, no matter what or where you are, we are a testament that
mhm.
He can take beauty from ashes.
Absolutely. Absolutely 100%. And he he works all things for good, and even our messes he works for good. And if you are married, if you are together, you're married to the right person.
Right. So it's
And
not
we
like,
miss
oh,
that.
well, I better start over and find someone who's like, no,
Nope. Just look to your left, look to your right, whoever's there, they are the right person.
you've made that commitment and you're going to go forward. Now, of course, as usual, we are not talking about um, active abuse. We are not talking about alcoholism. We are not talking about an abusive situation.
Yep.
That is one you need to leave and
Yeah,
take
get
care
out.
of
If you are not
yourself.
safe, get out, get help and stuff like that. And that does not mean that relationship is over forever. I mean, God can work all things. He doesn't always, but he can. But if you are in a situation where you are not safe, your children are not safe, get out and get
Get
help
help
immediately.
because that person is not honoring you
No.
and
And you are not, no matter what you think,
you aren't going to
you
change
will
them.
not change them. You're not going to pray them better. You're not going to, I am sure you have heard before, oh, it'll be different tomorrow, or I'm sorry. It's not. They need help.
And God can change them if they let God change them.
Absolutely.
But also, I think in a lot of those situations, we're probably going on a tangent here, but in a lot of those situations, I think people, like you said, second chances, especially people who have a trusting heart and you want to believe it. But I think there's a longer path of making sure someone's priorities have changed and they're living
Yeah.
that out. Because if they want the best for their spouse, they will understand that includes their safety.
Yeah, exactly. I do want to go back to one thing that you said. You were talking about prioritizing and your relationship and stuff like that with your spouse,
Uh-huh.
and how that reflects to your kids and other
Yeah.
people around you and stuff like that. With us, one thing that we did when we learned the
Oh, yeah.
law of priority and all this other stuff, um, was date night.
Yep.
And that was a huge piece because we have all these things competing for our attention, our priority, and everything like that. And we really do need to take a time to connect with one another on a regular basis, um, going forward. And
Yeah.
date night is a great way to do that.
And for people who know us, this is like not even a surprise or anything, because the very number one thing we always say is, are you doing a date night? When's your last date night?
Absolutely.
Do you have date nights planned? And by planned, I don't mean like, oh, next week we are going here, the next week we're doing this. And I don't mean planned out. I mean
Right. On the
set
calendar.
aside.
Yeah.
Yes. Like saved time, like Thursday night, Saturday from 1 to 5, I have a sitter, whatever works best for you. So we always say that that should be a non-negotiable, right? Like there
Absolutely.
should be certain things that are non-negotiables. And I think we should do a whole separate section on that. But things that you set aside and start to choose in your marriage that are non-negotiable, I do think date night is important for all. And what was that? We were like listening to or reading something that had that law of like weekly, monthly, yearly, or something. Do you remember that? And if not, we'll look it up and come back. But I remember reading this where it was like weekly date nights.
Hmm.
Um, I think it was like quarterly, like every like
Yep.
quarter of the year, you
Oh,
go away
for a
overnight
weekend. Yep.
or a weekend. It was like overnight, a weekend, like a small
Yep.
getaway, a small getaway,
And then
and
once a year, like for a week or so,
a,
just to get
a
away,
trip.
a trip somewhere and stuff like that. And I will say this, for 20 years, we had no clue about the date night thing. We really, really
Yeah,
didn't. And with us, we had four girls
yeah,
relatively quickly. I mean, they are 2 years apart.
cheers.
So, we always had someone vying for priority there, just because they were little girls. And you
Yeah,
get one who, okay, well, she's a little bigger, oh, here's another one. And okay, well, the first one, now she's getting out of diapers, but the second one, oh, here's a third one. And it was
right.
like this time frame where that was where your focus primarily was,
Yes, because of the
which is
season.
okay, but we
Yes.
still should have incorporated. But then after that, we never tried to recapture. We never understood that. So the girls started getting bigger, they were growing and stuff
Yeah,
like that. And,
it
that
was
was a
never a
wedge
thing.
between us because we didn't have that connection on a regular basis and stuff.
Yeah,
So when we did learn about the date night and start doing it and stuff like that, um, it was great. It was a game changer for us. But we
yeah,
also had, I think, they were all teens at the time. So we had four teenage girls who were like, "What are you talking about?
right.
Why would you
That's
want to do this?
weird.
That's
That's
weird.
so
Nobody does
weird.
that."
Like, what are you making me dinner before you go? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, and
We
and
should be more important.
absolutely. And I think that's good because we should be more important. And I think that was a good thing looking back. It's like, wow, our priorities were totally wrong. Not that the girls weren't or aren't important, because they absolutely are,
Yeah.
but they had taken that position here, and they knew they had taken that position. So if you have something that knows that has gone to, and they know that, it's going to be so much harder to put
To
something
flip
else
it.
in that. And with that, now we did day nights, and we still do. Friday nights are normally our
Friday
date night and
nights, yeah.
stuff like that. And I mean, it was a few months
Months.
before the flip. And then after that, it was just like,
A
and even
normal
now it's like,
thing.
oh, it's Friday, mom and dad are going wherever, do whatever and stuff like that. But just that time, and like, we don't go, I mean, every once in a while we'll go somewhere really nice or we'll do whatever. Sometimes we go to dinner, sometimes we go somewhere quick and we walk around the mall or go
Sure.
shopping or TJ Maxx. Sometimes we go to a movie, sometimes we go,
It's not usual.
that's not usually, we've
Not
been,
on a Friday night.
no, not on a Friday. That stuff
Tuesday.
costs a
Tuesday's
million
cheap
dollars.
movie night. We don't do that.
Movies on Fridays are like $1 million.
Yeah. And there's a lot of people, I think.
Yeah, but we've done everything. And there's so many date night activities out there. Like, we're here in Buffalo. When the weather gets warm, go to the jet boats. We
Oh,
were
there's
talking about that.
everything.
We did the
Yes.
jet boats one day. That was like the Whirlpool jet boats. That was so
So
much fun.
fun. That was like you're really good at date nights. And you plan everything and you enjoy, I think you enjoy
Hmm.
planning everything, and you like looking up new things and like, I've never been here, I've never, but it amazes me when people say there's nothing to do, there's nowhere to go, because I feel like we have found so many different
Yeah.
places and we share that with people like, oh, if you go here and you can listen to music and you go here, or taking a walk like in Lewiston with the dogs or
Yeah.
whatever. But
And
that
that's a,
jet boat, you surprised me one day,
yeah,
and I don't really care for surprises. But
at
you
all.
love surprises, but I don't like surprises. I would much like to be told everything that's going to happen, and I think that's more exciting because I get anticipation. But you did surprise me on that one, and I had usually when you surprise me, I know you and I have an idea of exactly what we're going to do, and I don't even tell you. I'm just like, "Oh, yeah." But I know. But this time I didn't. Like, I had no idea where we were going. And it was crazy. It was so wild. It was like a 90-degree September afternoon. Do you remember that?
Yes, I don't think it was. I think it was August, but yes, it
No, it
was
was September, I think. It
so
was like unusually
hot.
hot.
We did the jet boats. We went up to Sunset, in Wilson, which is
Yep.
beautiful. They get the deck all the way around
That
and
was so
music, and
fun.
we ate outside, watched the sunset on Lake Ontario. It was a beautiful, beautiful day. And the other side of that, we have had date nights where we just kind of hang out at home together, or go take a walk in Lewiston or around Delaware Park,
Oh, yeah.
or
We
just
should do more
like,
walks. We did. We
or
used to
to
bike.
Beaver Island. Yeah, we go for bike rides, but like, it doesn't have to mean that you got to go out and spend money and do stuff.
No.
You can just hang out at home or go somewhere for a walk or go somewhere. It doesn't have to be a big expense. It's that time you're spending together. And I think that's the more
And
important.
the adventures you're making. And you know what else is super good about date night? Ladies, pro tip. So we were just talking about this. If you are doing something with your husband, you're looking at me like I'm crazy. Like if you are doing an action, an
Oh,
activity, a
okay.
walk.
I thought this was going to be the Pastor Beth pro tip.
No. If you are doing something active,
Yes.
your husband is more likely to talk, to communicate, to start
To
a,
engage with you
yes, to engage. Thank you.
than if you're just sitting
And
face to
saying,
face.
talk
Yes.
to me, right?
Yes.
Like
Absolutely.
you rarely, and I feel like when we sit down and have a meal together, that's a good time to talk. You never talk when we're eating.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah, I'd rather be doing something when we're
Like I
out
could see
talking.
us going to coffee and talking, but that's more of a girl thing.
That is
Rocket's
definitely a girl
eating
thing.
my hair.
Nice. Um, Absolutely. But that's the thing. Like, date night is so, so important, and that's the way you prioritize your
Oh, let
relationship.
me say one more thing before you
Yeah.
stop talking about date night.
Okay.
It reminded me, I was listening to you say about how when the girls were young and we did not do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I was thinking about that season, and I was thinking about how when the girls were young and we didn't do date night, and yes, it was a hectic season and we were very busy, but if we had done date night, and maybe not even every week, because that also could be
Yeah.
expensive to find someone to watch your kids, stuff like that. I mean, there are very good ideas of like doing babysitting swaps with other couples that want to do date nights, but that's also about building a community. But if we had done that, we may have prevented a lot of things from happening
Yeah.
because we would have had that time to connect and to naturally not talk about just the kids. Because I remember the random times we did go on date night, it was hard to not talk about the kids then.
Absolutely. And I think the other side of that, like when they're little and stuff like that, or when it's a not very often thing, then you're more worried about the kids and you're more worried about
Yeah.
who's watching them
Yeah,
and
yeah.
stuff like that. So if it's a more regular thing,
They'll be
you're
used to
into
it
the
too.
rhythm of that.
And
So
yeah.
you're used to it. The kids are used to it. So you can actually relax and enjoy the time together more,
Yes.
which
Yep.
is important because you don't want to go and just be tense and worried and everything, because that's not going to be a fun date night. Date night's supposed to be fun. It's not time to talk about the kids. There's no heavy conversations. There's no
Yeah.
like anything like that. It is a time to enjoy the company
Try
of your
not to argue.
spouse. Yeah, try not to argue. Take different cars might be good, because
No,
that whole
no,
car
stop,
time is
stop.
sometimes can be a lot. But no, seriously, it is a time to relax, enjoy one another. It's not a time to, oh, I've been waiting all week. It's date night. I'm going to unload this on the other person.
We don't do that.
No, we don't.
We
But
don't.
we have heard stories of people who do.
We don't do
You
that.
know, so take advantage of that time together. Take advantage of the gift God's given you and your
Yeah.
spouse.
So in closing, I think going back to priorities, I think it's a great activity, super helpful. And we actually did this on our last retreat that we hosted to map out what you believe your priorities are. Like,
Yep.
be real, honest, and raw. And you can even run two lists next to each other. And you can say, this is really what my goal of my priorities are, but I think they're here and I really don't want them here, which is good because that's very self-aware.
Yeah.
But then also try to think about your day, like use today, and map out 8 a.m., woke up, 8:30, went for a walk, or what every single thing that you did, and then say, wow, when I'm looking at that, like if you're really ambitious, do it for a week. I liked that you said that. That was a good idea. But then say, wow, is it playing out this way? Because that might open your eyes to those two lists where you're like, no, I think I'm really good at this. And you're like, maybe I'm not as good as I think I am. So it's always good to get self-aware and help yourself.
Absolutely. And don't beat yourself up because you're not doing what you thought you were doing. Use it as a way to say, oh, a tool to say,
Yep.
okay, I thought this. If this is really what I want to be doing, if this is really my heart, how can I do it? And work at it, because, you know, we're none of us are perfect. And a lot of times our thoughts and our expectations are not really what they are or realistic.
Yeah.
And things like that, if it's our schedule, if it's stuff like that, you know, we can make those 1 degree changes like they talk
Yes.
about in Atomic Habits. And in 6 months, 180 days, you've totally turned around. So you probably aren't going to need 180 degrees. You're just going to need to go a few. And it's easy to make in those small chunks. Don't say, okay, well, tomorrow I'm changing my entire day. That's
No.
probably not realistic.
But when you do make those changes, your heart naturally starts to change and you'll want to do those and it
Yes.
becomes easier.
Yes.
So, like, maybe you don't show God the very first of your day. Maybe you're not prioritizing that. Maybe you're opening social media. Maybe you're just running out the door. Who knows? Maybe you're prioritizing coffee. Who knows? But the point is, you might not really feel the want to, but when you start to make those little changes, like you said, those 1%, eventually you will say, wow, I got so much out of that. I want to. I look forward to it.
Absolutely. And that's important, that once we do that, it makes a huge difference. It really, really does. Yeah, don't beat yourself up. Get your priorities right. Let them trickle down. I mean, that's really what it is. And try to honor whatever the priority is above it. Be honoring that in everything you do. So with your spouse, honor God. With your
Yeah.
kids, honor your spouse. With work, with whatever it is, just always be honoring those things up and letting those priorities be known.
And it's a good time to look at this and evaluate yourself and become self-aware because it's the beginning of the year.
Absolutely.
And you know what else I love doing in the beginning of the year?
Taking naps?
No, connecting with you
Yes.
on a vision retreat.
Absolutely.
And you know what we're doing special this year?
We're taking people with us.
We are taking people with us, and we have one spot for a couple, possibly two spots open for our vision retreat still. If anyone wants to join us, it will be January 31st to February 2nd. And what a vision retreat does is it is a guide, and you have a book, you get a book, and you walk through the book, which will walk you through your goals, your priorities, your plans for the year, so that your vision, I think all together culminates into a vision.
So you're on the same page.
And the two of you will be without distraction working on this for the weekend. We will help guide you through parts of it and give you some good breaks and some fun and some food and
Yes.
a beautiful location to go away and relax and have that time with your spouse.
Yes. So if you're interested in that, reach out to us. We would love to talk to you about it.
Yes. And we also have a Facebook page of Marriage in the Buff retreats,
Yep.
as well as Marriage in the Buff. And
Yep.
if anyone has questions or topic ideas, feel free to email us at
retreats@marriageinthebuff.com.
yeah.
All right. I think that's it for this week. Thanks for listening, guys. Make sure you like, subscribe to keep up. Like I said, next week, I'm pretty sure we'll have Mike and Megan on here with us. So we'll have a guest and
2 guests.
yeah. Oh, yes. 2 guests. But stay warm. It is cold. It's going to be 14
Here.
tonight
It is
here in
cold
Buffalo.
here.
So it is cold. And we'll miss you guys. Take care. Thank you. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.